and my ex-husband was already rushing his mistress to a clinic for an ultrasound. Meanwhile, I was canceling his corporate credit cards, revoking his access to 3 company-leased luxury condos and 3 company SUVs, and firing him from his position as CEO. The next day he would call me, "Honey, please forgive me." But that morning, Ian Sterling and I had officially signed the final divorce decree at the downtown Chicago courthouse. There were no screams, no tears, no desperate attempts to hold on to each other in the courtroom. He signed his name so fast, I barely had time to register my own signature. Stepping out of the courthouse, Ian adjusted his collar with the unbothered look of a man who had just wrapped up a standard board meeting, not a 7-year marriage. He didn't look back at me once. I stood on the steps, still clutching my copy of the decree. Inside, there was only a strange, ringing emptiness. 7 years of playing the wife, reduced to a couple of lines dissolving our marital union. I hadn't even made it home before my phone buzzed. My executive assistant was reminding me of an afternoon strategy session. I sighed, about to lock the screen, when I noticed Ian across the street, but he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was a young woman in a tight white dress. Her hand rested gently on her stomach. I instantly recognized her. Chloe Preston, a former employee from our company's marketing department. Holding hands in broad daylight, they walked straight into the obstetrics wing of a high-end private medical center. I didn't know why my feet carried me after them. I stopped a few yards away, close enough to hear every word in the lobby. Ian was speaking to the receptionist, his voice swelling with pride. "My wife is 8 weeks pregnant. Please book us the VIP suite." The words my wife echoed so clearly I thought I had misheard. 8 weeks, I quickly calculated. 8 weeks ago was exactly when he claimed to be flying to Miami for a 2-week business trip, followed by urgent networking events. My heart pricked, but not enough to make me cry. Strangely, I just smirked. I guess when you're betrayed enough times, the tears simply dry up. Ian turned around and locked eyes with me. He didn't flinch. He didn't look embarrassed. His eyes were pure ice. He shot it at me straight. "We're divorced. What are you doing here?" There wasn't a trace left of the man who had once knelt in the pouring rain to propose to me. Chloe pressed herself against Ian, cradling her belly, and announced loudly, "Honey, I'm feeling a bit dizzy." The way she looked at me, half pitying, half taunting, made my place in this story perfectly clear. I was no longer the wife. I was the past, and they were rubbing it in my face. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I didn't ask why. I just pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. Meredith Harper, the chief financial officer of our holding company, answered on the second ring. I spoke slowly, enunciating every syllable. "Meredith, cancel all auxiliary corporate Amex cards under Ian Sterling's name. Revoke his access to the 3 executive apartments and the 3 company vehicles." Immediately, hearing this, Ian scoffed. "Who do you think you are, giving orders?" I looked him dead in the eye, so calm it surprised even me. "I am the chairman of the board. And as of this moment, you are just unemployed." Chloe froze. Ian turned pale. I knew he hadn't expected me to strike back so quickly. In his mind, I was still the soft, compliant woman who would suffer, cling to him, or suffer in silence. But he forgot one crucial detail. The 3 condos he lived in, the 3 luxury cars he drove, all of it belonged to Vance Holdings, the company I inherited from my father. Ian was merely a hired CEO, not the owner. Ian's phone started ringing off the hook. I faintly heard him bark into the receiver, "What do you mean my card is declined?" Then came another call. "Mr. Sterling, the termination order regarding your position as CEO has been signed." His face went from pale to a sickly gray. Chloe, panicking, tugged at his sleeve. "Ian, you said you were going to take care of everything." That careless phrase was a slap to his ego. He looked at me, the arrogance in his eyes entirely replaced by utter confusion. I turned on my heel and walked away without another word. Behind me, I heard Ian shout, "Anna, don't cross the line." I didn't stop. Crossing the line? He crossed the line when, 15 minutes after our divorce, he took another woman to get an ultrasound. I was just taking back what never belonged to him in the first place. 15 minutes after the divorce, he thought he was free. He thought he had discarded the defective wife who couldn't give him a child. He thought he had shed a marriage that, in his mind, was holding back his career. But he didn't realize that freedom comes with a price. That evening, I sat alone in my massive living room, staring at the divorce decree on the coffee table. I wasn't happy, and I wasn't sad. I just felt a mild relief that I no longer had to play the role of the submissive wife. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. A man like Ian wouldn't accept losing everything in a single day. Sure enough, the next morning my phone rang. It was his familiar voice. But this time, the arrogance was completely gone. "Anna, please, give me a chance. I was wrong." I stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then, I laughed out loud. Turns out, people only remember the word chance when they lose their money and power. But my laughter held no malice. It was more of a heavy sigh. I declined the call, set the phone down. And my mind drifted back to the very beginning. There are some things you can never understand unless you look at their roots. For instance, how could a woman as gentle as I used to be turn so cold in just 15 minutes? My name is Anna Vance. To outsiders, it looked like I had hit the jackpot, marrying a talented, successful man, and living in luxury. They didn't know that the luxury was built on a foundation of hidden truths. I am the only child of Richard Vance, a man who built one of the largest construction and real estate holding companies in the country from the ground up. My father despised bragging. He taught me a simple truth. You can be rich, sweetheart, but never let wealth lead you by the nose. Whether they value you for who you are or for what you have will be revealed the moment you hit your first real crisis. When I met Ian Sterling, I didn't tell him about my family. I just said I worked in corporate planning, the salary was decent, and the hours were long. Ian was a director at a small branch office back then. He was charming, charismatic, and knew how to make people believe in him. He often talked about his grand ambitions, the massive projects he would spearhead, and how we would achieve everything together. I thought male ambition was a virtue. I believed that if I was genuine, I would receive genuine love in return. The day Ian proposed, it was pouring rain. I still remember how the drops drummed against the pavement. He got down on one knee. His hands, holding the ring, were shaking. The rainwater mixed with whatever was on his face, maybe rain, maybe tears. He said the words that melted my heart. "I only need you. Not money. Not anything else. Just you and your belief in me." I nodded. I thought a man willing to knee and ling in the pouring rain couldn't possibly be a bad person. But life has a twisted sense of humor. The most beautiful words are often used to mask the ugliest lies. After the wedding, I moved in with his mother, Margaret. In public, she always smiled, talked about family values, and bragged to the neighbors about her cultured family, her big-shot executive son, and her obedient daughter-in-law. But the second the front door closed, she picked apart my every breath. I still remember her looking me up and down, dropping casual venom. A daughter-in-law in this house needs to know how to give birth. If she can't, what use is she? At first, I thought she was just blunt, acting out of traditional anxiety about continuing the family line. I tried to endure it, to see the good in her. I even blamed myself. I thought it was my fault that we had been married for months with no good news. For the first 3 years, I struggled with infertility. I underwent treatments, took countless medications, changed my diet, and endured every invasive test imaginable. Coming home from work absolutely exhausted, I dreamed of just one thing. Someone asking, "Are you tired?" Instead, I got Margaret's clicking tongue and my husband's cold silence. I don't know exactly when Ian started to change. I just noticed he started leaving earlier and coming home later. His phone was always placed face down. Sometimes he would step out onto the balcony in the middle of the night, whispering to someone. When I asked, he'd snap, "It's work. Don't worry about it." His tone was no longer the soft voice from our engagement. It sounded like a boss dismissing a subordinate. Many times, I looked at him, wanting to demand the truth, wanting to cry, but I swallowed my tears. I still believed that men carried a lot of corporate stress, and if he was a little irritable at home, it was normal. I comforted myself with that lie so I could keep going. And because of that belief, I gradually handed over more and more of my authority at the company to him. First, it was signing off on minor documents. Then, it was the right to represent Vance Holdings at major project negotiations, because partners prefer dealing with men. Ian was incredibly persuasive. "You're my wife. You can be the woman behind the man. Everything I do is for the future of our family. I listened and nodded. I was even proud to have such a strong husband. I had no idea I was handing the keys to my house over to a man who was already eyeing the deed. One day, while reviewing a project report in my office, I was surprised to see Ian's name listed on several key contracts as the primary principal, while my name had practically vanished. I asked him about it, and he scoffed. What difference does it make whose name is on it? As long as the money flows into our accounts. I didn't want to argue. I thought, as long as the company was fine, the family was fine. But the more I yielded, the further I was pushed aside. And then my father died. When I got the news, I felt like I was falling into an abyss. My father was the person I respected and understood the most. At the funeral, Ian stood next to me in a sharp black suit. To everyone else, he looked like my rock. But only I knew that while his hand was on my shoulder, his mind was miles away. He was busy fielding phone calls and networking with guests. He was eager to shake hands with the shareholders, but he wouldn't look into the swollen, tear-filled eyes of his wife. After the formalities were settled, my father's personal attorney, Charles Kensington, called me into his office and handed me the will. My father had left a very specific stipulation. Total, unrestricted control of the holding company would transfer to me only when I turned 35. Until then, the board would maintain oversight on major asset liquidation. I sat there in a daze. I realized my father wasn't testing anyone. He just wanted to protect me and his life's work. I hid this from Ian. Not because I saw him as an outsider, but because I wanted to observe him a little longer. I still wanted to believe that Ian would share this burden with me, rather than just waiting for the chance to step over me. But after the funeral, Ian changed drastically. He reveled in the flattery, in being called Mr. Sterling, the boss. He thrived on it. Once, I gently advised him to be careful before signing a particular vendor contract. He looked at me and said something that sent a chill down my spine. Without me, you wouldn't have achieved anything here. He spoke as if he had forgotten whose foundation he was standing on. I wanted to argue back, but I stayed quiet. I told myself, fine. It's male ego. Let him talk, we'll discuss it later. I didn't realize that my silence was feeding his greed every single day. Because when someone sees that you always yield, they start to believe yielding is your nature. Then one day, by accident, a pop-up message illuminated Ian's phone screen, and everything snapped into focus. Just a few words, but enough to wake me up from my coma. I'm pregnant. You need to figure this out. The sender was Chloe. In that moment, I didn't scream. I just felt something snap inside me. It turned out that all these years, while I was blaming myself, enduring his mother, and swallowing my tears, it was all just a prelude to the day they would turn the page on me. That night, I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening to the ticking clock, asking myself one question. How much longer are you going to play the fool? From that minute on, the compliant, yielding part of me died. Only the rational, calculating woman remained. And a rational woman never loses in a game of paperwork. The message I'm pregnant. You need to figure this out was stuck in my head like a splinter. I reread it in my mind over and over. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I couldn't believe it appeared on my husband's phone during the exact same period I was battling hormones, lab tests, hope, and absolute despair. I didn't throw a fit that night. I quietly put his phone back, went to the master bathroom, and turned the water on full blast to drown out the sound of my own hyperventilating. I looked in the mirror at my pale face and the dark bags under my eyes, and I suddenly thought, am I trying to save my family, or just the illusion of it? The next morning, I asked Ian directly. No beating around the bush, no tears, just as a fact requiring confirmation. What does the message from Chloe mean? Ian, buttoning his dress shirt, froze for a split second at her name, but instantly recovered. He turned to me and twisted his lips. Don't make things up. It's work. I looked at him and asked slowly. Work that involves announcing a pregnancy? Ian yanked his tie in irritation and snapped. If you have nothing better to do, go to your therapy appointments and stay out of my business. The words go to your therapy felt like a knife to the gut. It wasn't just evasion, it was pure contempt. I stood in silence. I didn't argue. I understood. When a man starts using your deepest vulnerabilities to shut you up, the marriage is no longer a sanctuary. A week later, I saw the truth with my own eyes. I had a doctor's appointment that day. I arrived early, planning to buy some expensive supplements for my mother-in-law to preempt her daily complaints. As soon as I walked into the lobby of the private clinic, I saw a scene that rooted my feet to the floor. Ian was at the reception desk, Chloe right beside him. She was wearing a loose dress, her hand expertly placed on her stomach. Ian leaned in and whispered to her, his voice as soft as down. I hadn't heard that voice directed at me in years. I hid behind a decorative pillar. I didn't approach, but I didn't leave. I clearly heard the nurse ask, "Is this a routine checkup or your first visit?" Chloe answered softly, "Routine." "8th week," Ian nodded, adding, "If you get tired, just tell me. Don't push yourself." Hearing that, something inside me collapsed, not out of jealousy, but out of profound humiliation. Humiliation for all the times I, exhausted and nauseous from the IVF meds, told him I felt terrible, only for him to wave me off with, "Don't exaggerate." When I got home that evening, I said nothing. I needed proof. I refused to turn into the hysterical wife who makes a fool of herself. I secretly hired a private investigator. One phone call, one wire transfer, and a week later, I received a dossier with photos and a brief report that made my blood run cold. They had been together for over 6 months. 6 months. That meant it started while I was still doing the fertility treatments, still trying, still hoping. The report contained another detail that ripped the blindfold off completely. Chloe wasn't just a marketing rep, as I thought. She had become Ian's personal assistant. She traveled with him to meetings, managed his schedule, and arranged all the blocks of free time I never knew about. Reading that, I finally understood why his phone was always face down, why he stepped onto the balcony for weird calls, and why his business trips became so frequent. It wasn't work, it was a habit of betrayal. But the most painful blow was yet to come. The PI sent supplemental financial data. Ian had been transferring money from the company's operating accounts, masking them as corporate entertainment and expansion expenses, to buy a luxury condo registered under Chloe's relative's name. I read the bank statements and suddenly started laughing. I laughed because I realized he hadn't just defrauded my feelings. He was looting my inheritance, my father's life work, the holding company's assets. He treated the entire corporation like his personal piggy bank. I didn't wait any longer. I called Ian into the living room, tossed the folder with the photos and the bank statements onto the coffee table, and said one word: explain. Ian glanced at the papers, then leaned back on the sofa looking like a man annoyed by a minor inconvenience. He didn't apologize. He didn't deny it. He just sighed and said coldly, "Yeah. So what?" My breath hitched. I thought I would scream, throw plates, but no. I just asked in a raspy voice, "Why did you do this?" Ian looked at me like I was a slow child, and delivered a line that shredded whatever was left of my ego. "I need an heir. Can you give me one? No? Then don't ask." My whole body went numb. I realized that in Ian's eyes, I was no longer a wife. I was a failed contract. And since the contract failed, he immediately sourced a new vendor. I thought that was the absolute limit of human cruelty, but my mother-in-law showed me what it truly meant to shelter evil. When Margaret found out, not only did she not reprimand her son, she looked down her nose at me and cynically declared, "A successful man having a child on the side is completely normal. The important thing is that he comes home to you." I stared at her, my insides turning to ice. It turned out that all those years she berated me for my infertility. It wasn't because she pitied her son. She only cared about her bloodline, her prestige of having an heir. I was just an incubator that failed inspection. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. But I was done crying. I was piecing the puzzle together, and the horrifying truth dawned on me. They saw me as a bridge Ian walked over to reach the top. A bridge Margaret used to brag to her friends. A bridge that gave them status and corporate clout. And when the bridge was no longer convenient, they were ready to detonate it. Just as I suspected, Ian started pushing for a divorce. But he wasn't in a rush to just sign papers and leave. First, he laid out his terms. One evening, he casually tossed a thick folder of legal documents in front of me and said, like he was giving an order, "Sign over the operational voting rights to me, and then we'll get a quiet divorce." I looked at the papers and saw his sheer greed printed in black and white. I asked. What else do you want? Ian smirked. I want to do this the easy way. Sign it, and we won't complicate things. I understood. There it was, the real endgame. Chloe was just the catalyst. What he truly hungered for was the power and the assets. I didn't sign anything that night. I didn't argue. I just picked up my phone and called Charles Kensington, my father's lawyer, the same man who once told me, when in doubt, don't ask the person who created the problem. Ask the documents. I scheduled a meeting for the next morning. In the absolute quiet of his mahogany office, Charles opened the bylaws and walked me through every clause, every line. Only then did I realize the truth, which brought both pain and brilliant clarity. I still owned 51% of the holding company's voting shares. Ian was merely a designated representative with signatory authority, and that authority was only valid as long as I allowed it. In other words, he thought he was the master of the house, but he was only standing in my shadow. I walked out of Charles's office with a very strange feeling. Not joy, but absolute clarity. The clarity that if I showed any softness, I would lose everything. From that minute on, I started plotting. Not an emotional revenge scheme, but an exit strategy based entirely on the law, the corporate bylaws, and the price they had chosen to pay. Leaving the lawyer's office, I stopped asking why. I started asking how. Once I clearly understood what weapons I held, I didn't need to rush or succumb to emotions. I kept going to work as usual, came home on time, and answered my mother-in-law with exactly the minimal amount of politeness required. But inside, I had built a fortress. Seeing my silence, they assumed I had surrendered. In reality, I was calculating every move to end this cleanly, swiftly, and legally. Ian started getting nervous, probably because I wasn't sobbing or clinging to his ankles like he expected. One night, he came home late, dropped a divorce petition on the dining table, and said dryly, like he was reading an invoice, "We're not right for each other. Let's divorce." Margaret, who was sitting on the sofa peeling an apple, immediately snapped her head up. Her eyes lit up as if this was the moment she had been praying for. She dropped a line that was sweet to her own ears but pure venom. "Yes, set each other free. This girl is of no use to this family anyway." I looked at the divorce petition and didn't ask a single question. I didn't play up the drama. I asked practically, "What are your terms?" Ian smirked, thinking I was terrified, and rattled off his demands like an auctioneer. I retain my position as CEO. All corporate assets currently in my use, the penthouse, the 2 condos, the cars stay with me. You just sign the papers so we can keep this out of the press. Saying this, he even tried to feign nobility. Look, at the end of the day, I don't want to leave you with absolutely nothing. Hearing that, I almost laughed out loud. Doesn't want to leave me with nothing? Or doesn't want me to wake up and realize what's happening? I looked at Ian, a thought flashing through my mind. This is what happens when greed sits in the big chair too long, it starts believing it owns the chair. I gave a slight nod, pretending to be exhausted. I just want peace. If the divorce is amicable, I'll sign. Ian and Margaret froze for a second before unconcealed joy erupted in their eyes. Ian chuckled. That's the smart move. No need to make a mountain out of a molehill. I would sign, but not the garbage he slid across the table to me. I would sign the death warrant to his plans, in a way he would never see coming. That very night, I texted Charles. Prepare the documents to revoke all representative signatory authority. I will let him think he's won until the absolute last second. Charles replied simply, "Consider it done. I'm handling the filings." I read the text and felt a strange calm wash over me. Not vindictiveness, but the ice-cold tranquility of a person backed into a corner who suddenly finds a loaded gun. In the days that followed, Ian played his part with increasing zeal. He would come home and talk down to me. "I'll let you keep the smaller apartment in Lincoln Park. It's enough to live on. Don't be greedy." I stayed silent. His mother chipped away at me with mundane but humiliating remarks. "A barren woman in her old age. Who's going to support you? So keep your mouth shut and don't make my son's life difficult." I continued to stay silent, letting them gorge themselves on their own overconfidence. The more secure they felt, the sloppier they got. A week before the court date, we had our scheduled board of directors meeting. Ian strutted into the boardroom with the air of a king. Everyone greeted him. "Mr. Sterling." "Morning, Ian." He confidently took the chairman's seat and shot me a half smile, as if reminding me of my place. I kept my face utterly impassive. I only cared about one thing: the digital corporate signatures and access to the financial authorization systems. That was the real key to the castle. Not his arrogant words. During the meeting, I didn't argue. I simply requested to add one minor item to the agenda: review of digital signature access protocols in light of the upcoming cybersecurity software update. Ian immediately waved it off. Minor administrative issue. Let IT handle it. I nodded. Yes. Minor. But if such a minor detail gets lost, the problem becomes massive. A few board members glanced at me, but Ian just smirked, assuming I was trying to sound relevant. After the meeting, I went straight to the IT department alongside the director of cybersecurity. I demanded the access rights be updated in strict accordance with the corporate bylaws. Digital signatures and the authority to approve Tier 1 transactions must be routed exclusively to the chairman of the board. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid the original corporate charter on the desk. The IT director nodded and executed the change immediately. Ian knew nothing. He was busy standing in the parking garage, laughing on the phone with Chloe, as if the divorce was a mere formality. I kept everything under wraps until the final minute. I told no one. I knew perfectly well that the fewer people involved, the safer the trap. I warned only one person: Victor Morales, our head of internal security. Vic, keep an eye on everything. From this moment on, every single action related to Ian Sterling's office must be documented and logged. Victor looked at me and said one thing: Miss Vance, rest assured, there is nothing I hate more than a man who bites the hand that feeds him. The day of the court hearing, it wasn't raining, but the Chicago wind was biting, cutting right through to the bone. I wore a simple, tailored suit, my hair pulled back into a tight bun. Ian was a different story. He looked like he walked out of a GQ shoot and arrived at the courthouse with his mother in tow, holding Chloe's hand right in the public corridor. Chloe was heavily made up, wearing bright red lipstick, her hand perpetually resting on her stomach like an exclamation point meant exclusively for my eyes. Seeing me, Ian smirked and spoke loudly enough for the people nearby to hear. Here early? Afraid you're gonna miss out on your cut? Chloe played along, acting demure. Please don't be mad. I just came to support Ian. I looked at them and didn't waste a single breath on anger. I delivered one mundane, deeply irritating line: You guys are a perfect match. Congratulations. Ian froze. He clearly expected me to fly into a rage. He smirked again, but the smile was tight. Let's sign. And I'm free. Inside, the judge ran through the formalities of our settlement. I heard every word, but my soul was remarkably serene. When the final decree was placed in front of me, I didn't hesitate. My pen glided across the paper in one swift, decisive stroke. Ian looked at me in shock, as if he was looking at a stranger. He quickly signed his name underneath and leaned back in his chair, exhaling like a man dropping 100-pound weight. Walking out of the courtroom, Ian wrapped his arm around Chloe's shoulders and flashed a victorious grin. That's it. The new life starts now. I looked at him, not arguing. I just echoed his words with an entirely different meaning. That's right. You're free. He didn't realize that freedom comes with a bill. And the meter had started running the second the ink dried. I didn't say anything else. I simply pulled out my phone and dialed the numbers I had queued up. While Ian was busy crowning himself the victor, miles away, the system was already slamming shut the doors he thought would remain open to him for the rest of his life. I made the calls the second I stepped off the courthouse stairs. But I wasn't calling Ian, and I certainly wasn't calling his mother to scream. I was calling the people who needed to hear my voice and who had the authority to act. Because I understood that men like Ian only fear two things: a paper trail and the system. Tears, threats, or screams would only give him the ammunition to play the victim. I had barely walked away from the courthouse when I saw Ian, arm around Chloe, laughing and celebrating his win. They weren't in a hurry. They were walking slowly on purpose so I could watch them. I stood on the sidewalk, gripping my legal folder. I felt so calm it actually surprised me. Ian threw a glance over his shoulder and sneered. See that? That's what a real family looks like. His voice was deliberately loud so passers-by would hear, hoping I would feel humiliated. Chloe didn't miss her cue. She looked me up and down with utter contempt and delivered her poison. If you couldn't keep your man, who else is there to blame? I heard every word, and a chill washed over me. Not a chill of pain, but of absolute sobriety. I suddenly realized they didn't just want a divorce. They wanted to break me. They wanted me to cry, to scream, so they would have both an excuse and a justification for their actions. I didn't give it to them. I looked straight at Ian and said flatly, "Wherever you're taking her, just go. You're blocking the sidewalk." With that, I turned away. No shake in my voice, no humiliation, just pure resolve. But before I could take 5 steps, I saw them turn toward that high-end private medical clinic a few blocks down. I knew that clinic. Years ago, I had brought Margaret here for her specialty appointments. I had sat in those waiting rooms for hours waiting for my own infertility lab results. And today, the man who once held my hand in those corridors was holding another woman's hand, taking her for a VIP ultrasound. The irony of fate felt like a cheap movie script you'd criticize for being unrealistic. But life doesn't have to be realistic. It just has to be brutal at the exact right moment. I stood in the clinic lobby, just a few yards away. Ian walked straight up to the reception desk, bragging like he'd just won a trophy. "My wife is 8 weeks pregnant. I want to book the VIP suite." The nurse nodded, typing into her computer. Chloe leaned against Ian's shoulder, holding her belly and letting out a soft sigh, as if terrified the world might not notice she was pregnant. Ian signed the intake forms, his face beaming. He turned to her and said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. I've got it all handled." I had heard that exact phrase before, under very different circumstances. The day my father died, I sat on the floor, paralyzed with grief. Ian had said, "I'll take care of everything." But his everything meant taking care of his executive chair, shaking hands with the board, and seizing his chance to climb the ladder. Me, the woman who endured his mother's abuse, the agony of infertility, the crushing loneliness, I wasn't included in his everything. I didn't walk over to them. I took out my phone and called Meredith Harper in finance. My voice was calm to the point of being glacial. "Meredith, freeze all auxiliary corporate cards under Ian Sterling. Immediately." Meredith answered crisply, without a single unnecessary question. "Yes, Miss Vance. It will be done in less than 3 minutes." I hung up and called David Chen, the general counsel. "David, execute the termination of representative authority protocol. Revoke his digital signature and his access to the payment authorization systems. Draft the formal termination notice for the CEO position today." David replied clearly, "I will issue the internal memo and lock him out of the servers right now." Next, I called corporate facilities. Revoke his access to the company vehicles and the corporate apartments. Send the official notices to the building management and the parking garage security. The manager on the line hesitated for a split second. "Miss Vance, are you confirming this order?" I gave him a razor-sharp response. "Confirmed. The liability is entirely mine." I slipped my phone back into my purse and stood there for a few more seconds. Not because I was hesitating, but because I wanted to burn this image into my brain. The exact moment the man who treated me like discarded trash was drunk on his own fake victory. I wanted to remember this not for revenge, but so that if my heart ever dared to waver, I would have a brutal reminder to snap me back to reality. Right at the moment, Ian leaned over the counter to sign the deposit paperwork for the VIP suite. His cell phone rang. He picked it up and frowned. "Hello? What do you mean my card declined?" He opened his wallet, pulled out a different card, and swiped it. The terminal beeped an error again. Ian started getting agitated and snapped at the receptionist. "Miss, run it again." "I literally used this card yesterday," the receptionist replied with polite corporate detachment. "I'm sorry, sir. The system shows that this auxiliary card has been deactivated by the primary account holder." The phrase auxiliary card whipped across his face. He froze for a second, his eyes darting around the lobby like an animal sensing a trap. His gaze landed on me. Ian stormed over, hissing, "What the hell did you do?" I looked at him with the exact same calm and answered slowly, enunciating every word. "What the actual owner of the account does." Ian's eyes bugged out. "Are you insane? You think you have the right?" I cut him off. I didn't yell, but my voice was sharp enough to draw blood. You are the one who is mistaken. What gave you the right to think you could use corporate assets as your personal slush fund? Chloe, standing behind him, went pale but still tried to play her role. She groaned, Ian, I don't feel well, and looked at me, her voice trembling but full of accusation. If something happens to the baby because of you, I didn't waste time looking at her. I just delivered a cold, hard fact of life. The baby is your business with him. The money is the company's business. Having said that, I turned to leave, refusing to get dragged into a screaming match. But before Ian could lunge after me, his phone rang again. This time, it was HR. I faintly heard him scream into the speaker, What do you mean I'm fired? The voice on the other end must have been unyielding. Mr. Sterling, the order for your termination as CEO has been signed and is effective immediately. Ian's face completely changed. I clearly saw the habitual arrogance crumble, like a mask being ripped off. For the first time in my life, I saw him terrified. Real terror, not a performance. Ian stammered, That's impossible. Who signed it? Standing just a step away, I gave him a brief answer. The board of directors. And I initiated the motion. It looked like someone had cut off Ian's oxygen supply. He turned to Chloe, his eyes bloodshot, while she unconsciously blurted out a phrase that terrified even herself. You said you had everything taken care of. Her voice rang out across the clinic lobby. Several heads turned. Ian flinched and yanked her arm. Shut up! I watched the scene unfold, feeling no gloating joy. I just saw the cold truth. When someone loves you for the benefits you provide, the love vanishes the exact second the benefits do. I walked out of the clinic and took a deep breath. Not to hold back tears, but to exhale all the years of toxic patience and finally close this chapter. In that very second, I knew I was no longer the woman I used to be. Not the woman who thought enduring pain would save a marriage. Not the woman who blamed herself for infertility and believed she deserved to suffer. Starting today, I understood one thing. A woman doesn't need to scream to be strong. She just needs to be clear-headed and decisive. And everything built on lies will collapse under the exact price tag the liars set for themselves. I stepped out onto the Chicago pavement. The wind off the lake was biting, but the ice inside me was colder. Ian and Chloe were still arguing in the clinic lobby, their voices blending with the noise of the traffic. I didn't look back. I knew that the moment I revoked his cards, cars, apartments, and power, the game had escalated. This was no longer a story about a man betraying a woman. It was a war against greed that had just had its supply line cut. I had barely gotten into the back of my town car when my phone buzzed. It was Charles Kensington, my attorney. His tone was sharp. He cut straight to the chase. Miss Vance, Sterling's camp is going on the offensive. They just filed an emergency injunction demanding an asset freeze, accusing you of embezzlement and abuse of corporate power. I laughed out loud. Not out of joy, but at how utterly predictable the move was. Embezzlement of what? The assets belong to Vance Holdings. I simply revoked his usage privileges. He wants to legally convert corporate property into his personal divorce settlement, and he has the nerve to accuse me? Charles sighed heavily. They're deliberately aiming for the court of public opinion. If you get dragged into a messy investigation, they'll use it to spread rumors that the female chairman is on a hysterical power trip, hoping to force you to the negotiating table. I stared at the traffic ahead of me and saw Ian's true nature crystal clear. While he had power, he played the civilized executive. The second he lost it, he immediately resorted to mudslinging. Charles, I said calmly, stick strictly to procedure. I will handle the legal countermeasures. I will not yield a single inch, because yielding means losing everything. Head straight to the corporate office, Charles advised. Don't go home. Avoid any staged provocations or ambush cameras. Understood, I said, and hung up. My car headed straight for the Vance Holdings tower in the Loop. My mind was focused on one objective. Lock the doors, cut off the escape routes, and scrub all the tracks before they could do any real damage. I walked into the massive glass lobby. The employees looked at me with a mix of fear and curiosity. I didn't stop to explain myself. I gave a slight nod and headed straight for the executive boardroom on the top floor. I immediately summoned the 3 people I trusted the most. First to arrive was Meredith, the CFO. Her face was tense. Behind her came David, the general counsel, carrying his laptop and a thick binder of the corporate bylaws. The last to walk in was Victor Morales. His suit jacket was slightly dusty. He had sprinted from the security hub in the basement. I closed the boardroom doors, took a seat, and spoke bluntly. The situation has escalated to dirty warfare. We have to act decisively. Meredith asked immediately, Miss Vance, what else are they planning? I took a sip of water and delivered a line that made even my own blood run cold. I'm not exacting revenge. I'm taking out the trash. And if you leave trash sitting around, it starts to rot. Victor placed a flash drive on the table and spoke in his deep baritone. Miss Vance, reporting in. Since last night, Sterling's loyalists have been scraping data on vendor contracts. It's highly probable he is holding onto physical copies to use as blackmail or leverage. I stared at the flash drive, feeling a surge of both anger and sharp clarity. Turns out, he hadn't just prepared a pregnant mistress. He had prepared a golden parachute lined with stolen internal documents. David gritted his teeth. If he leaks those contracts, the partners will panic, and the shareholders will demand a vote of no confidence. This is corporate sabotage, not a divorce. I tapped my fingertips against the mahogany table and issued rapid-fire orders. Number 1. Reset all system passwords across the board, starting with the project archives and the payment authorization matrix. Number 2. Permanently terminate Ian Sterling's digital signature and all access rights, including any backdoor admin accounts. Number 3. Execute a full security audit of his office. Today, in front of witnesses, recorded on our internal cameras, and seal the doors. Meredith nodded. I will freeze all discretionary cash flow and credit limits immediately. David replied, I'll draft the internal memo, citing the specific violations of the corporate bylaws, so this is strictly procedural. No one will be able to claim wrongful termination. Victor kept it brief. I'll handle the office lockdown and evidence collection. Before I could even finish my next thought, my phone rang again. The name on the screen made me smirk. Margaret Sterling. I hit accept without even guessing what she would say. As expected, her voice was pure acid, like she was chewing on broken glass. You think you've won? Let me tell you, I will make sure you never show your face in this town again. I listened to her and just sighed. I wasn't going to argue. Arguing with someone who lives for drama is a waste of oxygen. I answered briefly, but with freezing politeness. Try it. Just remember, less talk, more action, or you're going to exhaust yourself. She started shrieking something else, but I hung up. No debates, no explanations. I owed her absolutely zero courtesy. I turned to David and gave him a standard corporate directive. From this moment on, record every threatening phone call. Screenshot every defamatory text message. Back up everything and build a file. Do not react emotionally. David nodded. Understood. Let them dig their own graves. Not even 5 minutes passed before Victor got a text from an analyst in the PR department. Chloe is live streaming on TikTok. I opened the app on my phone and, looking at the screen, I actually laughed. She was standing in a hospital corridor, her makeup artistically smudged, holding her stomach. She was crying, playing the ultimate victim. My ex-boss's wife is going crazy out of jealousy. She stripped my fiancé of everything. I'm pregnant, and she's trying to ruin our lives. Below the video, hundreds pitied her, and some were just there for the reality TV drama. That's the horror of social media. Anyone can become a judge and jury based on a 30-second clip. Meredith looked at me, panicked. Miss Vance, we need to issue an official denial immediately. I shook my head and spoke slowly. No. Let them perform. The more they perform, the more rope they hang themselves with. David agreed. The more she talks, the higher the chance she contradicts herself or slips up. We just need to wait for one fatal error. I nodded. In that moment, there was no room for grievance in my heart. I only had one thought. To win this game, you have to be able to endure the noise. Charles called again. His voice was grim. Miss Vance? Sterling is meeting with a tabloid journalist tonight. They're likely planning to dump the whistleblower files to force a settlement. Watch your back. I wasn't surprised. I just replied, "Rest assured, Charles, I won't back down. Help me prepare the official counterfiling and the asset ownership documentation. I want a bulletproof package ready before they can even hit publish." "You're making the right moves," Charles said. "Don't let them drag you into the mud." I hung up and looked at my three executives. I closed the meeting with one final statement to ground us in reality. From this second forward, we operate as if we are managing a tier, one corporate crisis, not my divorce. Victor stood up first, his eyes hard. "Miss Vance, you have my word. Anyone who tries to drag you through the mud, I will drag them into the spotlight." Meredith took a deep breath. "I'm locking down the treasury." David nodded. "And I'll seal the legal loopholes." I leaned back in my chair, listening to the hum of the HVAC. Outside this building, they were spinning webs to paint me as the villain. But inside this room, I knew exactly what I was doing. I didn't need pity. I needed to be legally unassailable. When you act according to the law and the bylaws, the people playing dirty will eventually slip on their own mess. I hadn't even finished the thought slip on their own mess when my phone rang again. It rang aggressively, like someone was trying to pluck my nerves. "An unknown number," I answered. A dry male voice attempted to sound polite. "Anna Vance? I'm a reporter with the Financial Chronicle. We received a video of you causing a scene in a medical clinic. It was almost funny how outdated the playbook was. Yet people still relied on it." I asked calmly, "What video?" He hesitated. "The video shows you screaming and threatening a pregnant woman. The internet is pretty outraged. We want your side of the story." I sighed quietly. I knew immediately the video was doctored. They just needed the visual of me standing there, overdubbed with fake audio, slapped some clickbait headlines on it, and boom, I'm the monster. I spoke directly, without pleading. "If you want to publish it, publish it. But make sure you also publish the raw, uncut security footage that I am about to send you. If you knowingly publish a fabricated video, my general counsel will be in touch with your publisher by close of business." Dead silence on the other end. Then his tone softened drastically. "Miss Vance, please, we just want to ensure fair reporting from both sides." I cut him off. "I am perfectly calm. Give me your email address. I will send you the unedited lobby surveillance footage immediately." I hung up and turned to Victor. He understood without a word. He opened his laptop, typed rapidly, and called a contact in the medical clinic's security department to pull the raw CCTV files. Watching Victor work, I realized that in moments of chaos, the most valuable asset isn't a promise. It's competent people who know how to execute. Within the hour, Victor put the raw footage on the screen in front of me. On tape, I just stood there, watched, and made phone calls. I didn't lunge at anyone. I didn't scream. The viral version was a cheap voiceover job designed to spark outrage. Victor added another piece of intel that made me narrow my eyes. "Miss Vance, I traced the source IP. It was first uploaded by a burner account linked to Ian's former assistant, a guy named Arthur Sykes. He quit 3 months ago." I nodded. Another piece of the puzzle snapped into place. They decided to hit me with a PR smear campaign first, because public outrage is cheap to manufacture but causes massive damage. Once I was painted as a bitter, vengeful ex, all my legitimate actions, taking back the condos, the cars, the corporate access, would look like a hysterical woman's abuse of power. If I panicked, I would make a mistake. If I made a mistake, they would win. Before they could celebrate, Meredith rushed back in. She looked pale. She dropped a stack of wire transfer logs on the table and spoke fast. "Miss Vance, I found 3 highly irregular transfers from the operating account to a newly incorporated LLC. The digital authorization signature belongs to Ian Sterling. The wires were sent last week." I looked at the amounts, then the dates. Last week, the exact time he was still playing the amicable husband, rushing me to sign over operational rights so things could go smoothly. A chill ran down my spine. The divorce wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was the final step in a premeditated embezzlement scheme. He had been preparing his golden parachute for months, just waiting for my signature to make me legally liable for the fallout. I didn't slam my fist on the table. I didn't curse. I spoke with the clinical precision of a forensic auditor. "Meredith, Freeze any outgoing wires that exceed the standard operational limits. Draft a comprehensive forensic report. By tonight, I want to know exactly where the money went, who the beneficiary is, and if there are any actual deliverables attached to this LLC. Meredith nodded. On it. I turned to David. Dave, prep the internal chain of custody. Everything needs to be bulletproof. Digital signature logs, IP addresses, timestamps. Done, David replied. Right at that moment, a commotion erupted in the ground floor lobby. A junior staffer ran in, out of breath. Miss Vance, Mr. Sterling is downstairs. I stood up slowly and adjusted my blazer. I knew this scene would happen eventually. A man who just lost his throne will inevitably try to reclaim it by causing chaos. I walked out of the boardroom and looked down at the lobby through the glass atrium. Ian was standing in the center of the lobby like he owned the place. Behind him was Chloe, and next to him was Margaret. Margaret looked ready for a bar fight, her hands on her hips, her face twisted in rage. Chloe was clutching her stomach, her eyes red, playing the fragile victim. Ian scanned the crowd of employees and bellowed loud enough for everyone to hear. I am still the CEO of this company. She is just a spoiled brat who inherited daddy's money. Many employees lowered their heads, afraid to make eye contact. A few looked up at me with worried expressions. I took the elevator down to the lobby, stopped a few feet away from Ian, maintaining my distance, and spoke with absolute authority. Mr. Sterling, your employment was terminated at 2:12 p.m. today. A company-wide memo has been distributed. The fact that you are down here throwing a tantrum is a choice, a very poor one. Ian sneered, trying to save face in front of the staff. You think one piece of paper means anything? You don't know the law. I replied instantly, without missing a beat. I know the law perfectly well. That's why I'm standing here, and you're standing there. Chloe immediately activated her waterworks. Do you want to drive us to our graves? I'm pregnant. Aren't you afraid of karma? I looked at her and delivered a single freezing line. No one is driving you anywhere. You climbed into this bed yourself. You can deal with the consequences. She froze, clearly not expecting me to refuse to play the villain in her melodrama. Margaret, seeing the momentum shift, lunged forward and shrieked. If you don't give back the apartments and the cars, I will ruin you. I'll tell the whole city what a vicious bitch you are. I looked her dead in the eye, refusing to stoop to her street brawl tactics. I just told her the truth. My reputation isn't built on your gossip. It's built on a paper trail. She choked on her words, and Ian went a shade paler, because he realized I was talking about the exact thing he feared most. Ian took a half step closer. His voice dropped to a menacing hiss. Anna, don't push me. If you piss me off, you're going to regret it. I stared him down. Try me. But remember, when you lose your temper, you show everyone exactly who you are. Ian's jaw clenched. His fists tightened as if he wanted to smash something. Right then, Victor stepped up behind me and whispered rapidly. Miss Vance, they brought plants. Looks like a setup for a viral video. I glanced toward the revolving doors and spotted two unfamiliar men lingering by the security turnstiles. Their phones were out, lenses aimed right at me. They were framing the shot. I instantly realized the play. They wanted me to lose my temper, to shove someone, to create the perfect soundbite of the billionaire heiress assaulting a pregnant woman. 1 second of lost control, and they'd have enough ammunition to smear me on every network. I took a slow breath and spoke to Victor loud enough for him to hear. Don't touch them. Call building security. Have them escorted out for violating the corporate filming policy. Then I turned back to Ian, my voice dead flat. If you want to talk documents, we can talk in a boardroom. But if you're here to perform a play, I apologize, but I don't have time to be your co-star. The air in the lobby was thick. A crowd of employees had gathered. Ian stood there on one side, his fake fainting mistress, on the other, his screeching mother, and behind him, the cameras waiting for the money shot. And me? I stood perfectly still. I knew that if I just stood there long enough, they would inevitably reveal their true colors to the crowd. Ian's eyes darted around, calculating which scene to act out to get the best reaction. People were holding their breath. I knew what he wanted. A touch, a harsh word, a shove, anything to make me look unhinged. Suddenly, Ian took a step toward the decorative coffee table in the lobby, which held water pitchers and floral arrangements. He deliberately slammed his elbow into it. A glass pitcher crashed onto the marble floor, water splashing everywhere. He immediately pointed a finger at me and roared like a wounded animal. "You see this? She treats me like garbage. She stole my life, and now she wants to throw me out like a dog." Several people gasped. The two men by the door immediately raised their phones, zooming in on me. Chloe didn't miss a beat. She whipped out her own phone, pointed it at me, and started sobbing hysterically. "Someone help us! I'm just a pregnant woman. She's trying to destroy us." Her voice shook, but her eyes were gleaming. It was the look of a predator waiting for me to explode so she could capture it in 4K. I didn't move an inch. I didn't react. I just turned slightly to Victor and nodded. Victor knew exactly what to do. He walked over to the AV control panel for the massive LED presentation wall in the lobby and spoke briefly into his radio. A few seconds later, the massive screen flickered to life. At first, people thought it was a corporate promo video, but it wasn't. It was the live feed from the lobby's CCTV cameras, rewound to 30 seconds ago. It was broadcast in high definition. The footage clearly showed Ian deliberately throwing his elbow into the table, knocking the pitcher over himself, and then turning around to scream. It also showed Chloe, long before the glass even broke, already holding her phone at the perfect angle, positioning herself so I would be framed perfectly in her shot, like a director setting up a scene. It was so naked, so obviously staged, that it required zero explanation. The lobby fell dead silent. Someone in the back muttered, loud enough to cut through the quiet, "Holy shit." He faked it. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ian went ghost white. He lunged toward the screen, screaming, "Turn that off! Who authorized this?" He tried to rip the control tablet from the engineer's hands, but Victor stepped in front of him, massive and unmovable. "Do not cause a disturbance," Victor said coldly. "You are on private property. The internal cameras operate under standard security protocol." I took a step forward, just enough for everyone to hear me. My voice wasn't loud, but every word struck like a hammer. Putting on a show for me is one thing, but putting on a show for hundreds of my employees? Who exactly do you think is stupid here? Someone in the crowd actually chuckled a dry laugh from someone sick of the farce. Ian froze, his lips trembling. He hadn't expected me to not only dodge his trap, but to broadcast his pathetic setup on a jumbotron. Margaret, realizing the tide had turned, lost what little restraint she had. She lunged at me, raising her hand as if to slap me or grab my phone. But Victor intercepted her effortlessly. His voice was absolute zero. "Do not touch her. You are on camera, and the police will be called." She shrieked, "Get out of my way! I need to teach this bitch a lesson." Victor didn't flinch. "Who are you teaching? This isn't your living room. This is a corporate headquarters." I didn't even look at her for long. I turned to the building's security guards and gave a single, decisive order. "Call the Chicago police. File a trespassing and disturbing the peace report. Add deliberate harassment and unauthorized filming on private property to the complaint." The head guard nodded and immediately called dispatch on his radio. I didn't need to scream. I needed a police report. The word police has a funny way of making arrogant people very nervous. Ian instantly switched tactics, pivoting as fast as a chameleon. He dropped his voice, trying to look wounded, and turned to me as if we were still intimate. "Anna, I was wrong. But you can't just strip me of everything. I have a reputation. I need a way to live." He said it loud enough for the bystanders to hear, hoping to pivot the narrative back to me being heartless. Chloe pivoted too, whimpering, "Miss Vance, please forgive us." I smirked, not with malice, but with the exhaustion of someone who sees the strings on the puppets. "Strip you? No. I'm just repossessing what isn't yours." I didn't add any profanity. The more toxic the person, the easier it is for them to trap themselves. I wasn't going to get muddy. Just then, Meredith stepped out of the executive elevator holding a thick red folder. She walked right up to me and spoke loudly enough for David and the lingering executives in the lobby to hear. "Miss Vance, here is the forensic report on the 3 wire transfers to the Shell LLC. We have the digital signature logs, the timestamps, and the beneficiary details. I didn't open the folder. I just took it and turned to Ian. I looked at him, my voice calm but slicing like a scalpel. You thought I was just going to take back the condos and the cars? I'm taking back the evidence. Ian physically recoiled. All the blood drained from his face. He opened his mouth to deny it, but he didn't get the chance. Chloe, panicking, blurted out the exact same phrase she had used at the clinic. But you told me you had the money hidden. The moment the words left her mouth, she realized she had just buried the man standing next to her. The lobby erupted into a deafening murmur. Margaret whipped around and snarled, "Shut up, you idiot!" But it was too late. I didn't even need to finish them off. I turned to David and gave the procedural order. File the civil suit for corporate embezzlement and fraud immediately. Forward the findings to the district attorney. From this moment on, all communications with Mr. Sterling go through legal. David nodded and pulled out his phone. Victor stood guard, his eyes locked on the men with the cameras. Ian stood in the middle of the lobby, surrounded by the stares of people who used to call him boss, who were now looking at him with suspicion and utter disgust. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Because when your behind-the-scenes fraud gets aired in public, excuses become entirely useless. I knew this was just the opening salvo, but it was loud enough to send the message. I was no longer the woman who could be led by the nose. After the CCTV footage played in the lobby, Ian and Chloe's circus was exposed in front of dozens of employees. The atmosphere shifted entirely. Building security filed the incident report. Ian was escorted out of the building to the sound of hushed whispers. Margaret tried to keep screaming to save face, but the louder she yelled, the more of a clown she looked. I stood silently, watching the trash being taken out. Once the lobby doors closed, I turned to the staff and calmly asked everyone to return to work. For the rest of the day, Vance Holdings stabilized. I held a quick briefing with the department heads, emphasizing one thing. Business continues as normal. Any threatening calls or messages were to be routed directly to internal security. I knew Ian wouldn't just give up. Men like him don't exit gracefully when they lose power. They choose the path of maximum noise to exhaust their opponents. I was right. That very evening, barely after I had arrived home to my Gold Coast estate, Victor called. His voice was taut. "Miss Vance, do not step outside. We have a situation at your residence." I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked over to the window, peeked through the blinds, and saw flashing lights, a crowd of people, and neighbors pointing at my property. I opened the security app on my phone to check the gate cameras. What I saw made my blood run cold. The wrought iron gates of my driveway had been splashed with red paint, dripping like blood. A massive vinyl banner was zip-tied to the stone wall, placed perfectly for the affluent neighborhood to see. The billionaire CEO stole a husband and is driving a pregnant woman to suicide. Flyers with my face cropped from some gala photo were scattered all over the sidewalk with vulgar slurs printed across them. I stood there for a few seconds and saw the strategy clearly. They were weaponizing mob mentality. It doesn't matter if it's true or false. The noise is the point. A person smeared in front of their wealthy neighbors is supposed to break down from the shame. Ian wanted me to run out there, start screaming, look unhinged, so they could film it and prove I was a lunatic. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I called Victor. My voice was steady. "Victor, don't clean it up yet. Do this first. Get the license plates from the neighborhood cameras. Find out who hung the banner, and document the scene exactly as it is." "I'm already pulling the intersection traffic cams," Victor replied instantly. "Call the CPD and the neighborhood HOA," I added. "Have them send an officer to file a vandalism report. I am not stepping foot outside." "Understood," Victor said. I knew that the more I reacted, the more I fed their narrative. But paper trails and police reports? That's what they feared. I had barely caught my breath when Charles called. His voice was heavy. "Miss Vance, Ian just filed a lawsuit demanding a freeze on your voting shares. His grounds are sweat equity contributed to the company and suspicion of you illegally transferring marital assets to third parties." I laughed, a cold, dry sound in my empty living room. It was absurd but dangerous. His contribution was sabotage, not equity. The assets belonged to the corporation. I just took back the company cars. Charles continued. "They are trying to drag you into a settlement. If you don't look strong here, They will use this lawsuit to bleed you in the press. Draft the counter motion, I said sharply. I want everything strictly by the book. Every accusation met with a forensic receipt. I am not afraid. We just need to move faster than them. The moment I hung up, my phone pinged with an encrypted file from Meredith. The Shell LLC that received the wires, her message read. Miss Vance, this company is registered to Margaret Sterling's cousin. It's a family operation. I stared at the text, and the final puzzle piece locked into place. This wasn't just Ian cheating, and it wasn't just a messy divorce. This was a coordinated family embezzlement ring using strawmen, designed to loot the holding company before he filed for divorce. I leaned back in my armchair, watching the streetlights cut through the dark. I wasn't sad anymore. I was hyper-vigilant. If this was a premeditated scheme, they wouldn't stop at banners and red paint. They would use fixers, threats, blackmail, anything to make me flinch. Right on cue, my phone rang. An unknown number, I answered. A raspy, male voice chuckled a laugh with zero humor in it. You want this all to go quiet? Meet me. Don't do something stupid. I gripped the phone and asked directly. Who is this? He dragged out his words, trying to sound menacing. I've got a flash drive from your ex-husband. It's got files on it you really don't want seeing the 6 o'clock news. I went silent for a few seconds. Not out of fear, but to process the escalation. They had moved to felony extortion. I asked in an even tone, What do you want? Let's meet and chat. Come alone. I looked at my watch and said decisively, Name the place. I'll be there. As soon as the line went dead, I called Charles back. I was just contacted by a blackmailer. He says he has Ian's flash drive. Charles immediately panicked. Miss Vance, do not go alone. It's a trap. I looked out the window. The streetlights cast sharp, razor-like shadows on the glass. I answered slowly, but with absolute certainty. I'm not going alone. I'm going with a better trap. I immediately conference called Victor and briefed him on the extortionist. Victor paused for a moment, then said, Got it. I'll prep a surveillance team. We lock this down. Strictly by the book, I emphasized. Everything legally documented. Witnesses, recordings in a one-party consent zone, or whatever loophole we need. I am not giving them a chance to turn this back on me. Understood, Victor said. I sat in the quiet hum of the house. For the first time in this whole ordeal, I smelled real danger. Defamation and petty insults I could handle. But when they brought in third-party fixers and extortion, it meant they were out of legal options and resorting to desperation. I told myself to stay clear. Fear is defeat. But not being afraid didn't mean acting recklessly. I needed a plan precise enough to leave them no wiggle room and brutal enough to crush them in one swift motion. I locked down the house, drew the blackout curtains, and that very night, I convened a war room with my 3 top executives, not at my house, but in a secure, sweep-tested conference room in the corporate tower, complete with armed security in the hallway. When Meredith, David, and Victor sat down, I didn't mince words. I looked at them and laid it out. They have 2 weapons, public opinion and dirty tricks. We need 2 pieces of irrefutable evidence and 1 kill shot. We either don't swing at all, or we swing so hard they never get back up. Meredith nodded, her eyes red with exhaustion but burning with focus. David already had his laptop open. Victor was silent, calculating the angles. I relayed the conversation with the blackmailer. Victor slid a printed dossier across the table. Miss Vance, the caller isn't a random thug. I ran the voice and number parameters. It matches a guy named Pete Monroe. He's a crisis manager, specializes in black PR, fabricated smear campaigns, and corporate extortion. He's been sued a dozen times but always slithers out because he operates in the gray areas. I looked at the name Pete Monroe, and the picture was complete. Ian hadn't acted alone. He hired a professional hitman to destroy my reputation and extort a settlement. Then we build him a legally flawless grave, I said without hesitation. I'll pretend to agree to the meeting. David looked up. Miss Vance, that's incredibly risky. If you go alone without legal oversight, I won't be alone, I countered. If we pick a private dining room at a high-end restaurant somewhere with corridor cameras, witnesses, and a notarized transcript, he'll be the one walking into the trap. Victor nodded. The location? A private VIP room at Gibson's Steakhouse. We can control the environment. David outlined the legal framework. You text him that you're terrified of the press and want a confidential NDA signed in exchange for the payoff. When he hands over the drive or names his price, we capture the extortion on tape. Exactly, I agreed. And remember, no entrapment. We just record a crime in progress. I'll have Charles prep the affidavits and coordinate with a friendly contact at the state's attorney's office, David said. Meredith shifted the topic to the money, speaking with rapid-fire precision. I'll finalize the forensic accounting report by morning. 3 wire transfers to the dummy LLC. Complete with Ian's digital signature logs, IP addresses, and timestamps. I'm also pulling the fake invoices to prove premeditated embezzlement prior to the divorce filing. The presentation has to be surgical, I told her. No emotions, just blades. David added the final blow. His voice was quiet but lethal. There is something more powerful than the police or the press. Section 4, Clause B in Richard Vance's will. It explicitly states, any designated officer or representative who commits fraud, embezzlement, or acts of sabotage against Vance Holdings shall be permanently stripped of all equity, severance, and voting rights. I am placing the activation of this clause on the agenda for tomorrow's emergency board of directors meeting. Hearing that, a cold shiver went down my spine. My father truly had seen everything. He didn't teach me how to seek revenge. He taught me how to cut the throat of corporate greed. Do it, I nodded. And one more psychological play. The 3 of them looked at me. Issue a company-wide memo announcing an unannounced forensic audit. Don't name Ian. Just say the company is reviewing all Q3 cash flows and digital signature authorizations due to irregularities. The guilty parties will panic and try to cover their tracks. The more they scramble, the more evidence they leave behind. Victor allowed himself a faint smile. Brilliant. Panic makes people stupid. The meeting seemed to be wrapping up. But Victor suddenly placed a burner phone on the table and hit play. Miss Vance, listen to this first. I leaned in. A voice came through the speaker, clear, undeniable. It was Ian. He was speaking in a low, cold tone, presumably to Chloe. I don't care if the pregnancy is real or not. What matters is we use it to force her into a settlement. I froze. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. The pregnancy could be real, or it could be a complete fabrication. But they were explicitly weaponizing it as a noose for my neck. I suddenly understood why Chloe was so eager to do TikTok lives, play the victim in the lobby, and check into the hospital. They saw the pregnant victim narrative as the ultimate shield. Nobody wants to be the billionaire who destroyed a pregnant woman. Meredith looked at me cautiously. Miss Vance, should we leak this to the press? No. I shook my head instantly. This is our trump card. If we leak it now, they'll just claim it's AI-generated or selectively edited. It has to be deployed at the exact right time, in the exact right place, in front of the exact right audience. The board of directors, David realized. Exactly, I said. In front of the major shareholders, on the official record, with the corporate attorneys present, they won't have anywhere to hide. I pulled out my phone and sent Ian a brief text, just enough to bait him without giving anything away. You want to talk? Emergency board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Be there. I hit send and set the phone down. A few minutes later, the reply came, the classic response of a man oscillating between rage and panic. You think you've won? I have something that will strip you of everything. I smirked at the screen and replied with one sentence. I have something too. But I don't make threats. I looked at my team. Tomorrow, I lay out all the evidence in front of the shareholders. We strike 3 pressure points: the embezzlement, the extortion via the PR fixer, and the fake pregnancy leverage. I'll lock down the boardroom floor, Victor said. Nobody pulls a stunt tomorrow. Financial report ready by 8 a.m., Meredith added. And the legal resolutions drafted, so there is 0 room for appeal, David finished. We adjourned near midnight. Just as I stepped into the hallway, my phone rang. An unknown number from a hospital. A nurse's anxious voice came through. Miss Vance, Chloe Preston was just admitted in severe distress. She claims she is having pregnancy complications, and she named you as the cause of her extreme stress. I stopped walking. They really didn't sleep. They were escalating the drama to attempted manslaughter of an unborn child. I gripped the phone, looking at my reflection in the glass wall. I had one thought. Fine. You want to play this to the bitter end? Let's go. But this time, I'm going to bring the house down on the stage you built for yourself. The next morning, I arrived at the Vance Holdings Tower before the sun was fully up. The midnight call from the hospital made their strategy obvious. They were prepping for a kill shot. I didn't go to the hospital, and I didn't draft an apology. I just texted Charles. Prepare the official countersuits. Today's board meeting is the finale. I walked into the executive boardroom, the arena where wars are won with paper, not tears. The room was freezing. The major shareholders were already seated. Faces that used to smile at me now looked guarded and alien. The rumors of my cruelty, of how I had supposedly left my husband destitute the second the ink dried on the divorce, had already circulated. I caught their evaluating stares. Some were neutral, others were frowning, waiting to see if I would break down or lash out. I didn't justify myself. I opened my laptop, placed my legal binder on the mahogany table, and nodded to the corporate secretary. Call the meeting to order. Record everything for the minutes. Every objection, every statement, get it on the record. The acting chairman was about to speak when the double doors swung open. Ian walked in. He was exactly 10 minutes late, a calculated move to project dominance. Behind him was Margaret, looking haughty, and a man in a slick gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. Ian projected his voice so the whole room could hear. I am here to demand justice, not to sit back and watch a bitter woman exact revenge. A murmur rippled through the boardroom. A few executives glanced at me, waiting for the explosion. I gave them nothing. I just looked at him and signaled the secretary. Continue. The calmer I was, the harder it was for them to drag me into their emotional swamp. Ian's lawyer introduced himself. Oliver Barnes. He had the booming, theatrical voice of a man used to grandstanding in court. We demand an immediate injunction against Mr. Sterling's termination. The actions taken against him demonstrate a gross abuse of corporate power, aimed at illegally seizing marital assets. Revoking his housing, vehicles, and credit lines is nothing short of a personal vendetta, I smirked. Not out of contempt, but because it was astounding to hear such blatant lies delivered with such a straight face. I replied briefly, ensuring everyone grasped the absurdity. Marital assets? Corporate property is corporate property. Are you trying to convert a multi-billion-dollar holding company into my alimony payout? A few of the older shareholders let out dry chuckles. They realized I was aiming at the heart of the matter. Ian slammed his fist on the table. His eyes were bloodshot. He tried to summon righteous fury. Don't deflect. You stripped me of everything right in front of the woman I love. You humiliated me. He leaned heavy on the word humiliated, desperately trying to turn a corporate board meeting into a moral tribunal where he was the victim. Margaret, sitting in the gallery chairs behind him, immediately pulled a tissue from her purse and started sobbing loudly. I looked at Ian, enunciating every word slowly. You were humiliated by your own betrayal, Ian. Not by my actions. The room went dead silent. Someone looked down. Someone else sighed. Ian faltered for a second, but tried to push back. This is a family dispute. Why are you dragging the corporation into this? I'm not talking about a family, I fired back. I'm talking about the corporation. Because you dragged the corporation into it the second you authorized those wire transfers. Margaret sobbed louder, her voice turning shrill. She's evil. She's trying to destroy my son. She ruined him and took everything. I turned to her, refusing to engage in a screaming match. I knew that people like her only feed on chaos. I looked at her for 1 second, then pivoted to the one thing she couldn't argue with, math. I turned to Meredith and said sharply, "Run the cash flow report." Meredith stood up and clicked the projector remote. The massive screen lit up with the transaction logs. 3 massive wire transfers from the corporate operating account to a newly registered LLC. The dates were days before Ian handed me the divorce papers. The sums were deep into the 7 figures, enough to make every shareholder in the room sit up straight. Whispers broke out. "What's the LLC?" someone asked. Heads turned toward Ian, and the looks were no longer sympathetic. Ian went pale but tried to hold his ground. Those are vendor payments. Standard operational costs for expansion. I raised a hand, cutting off the brewing arguments, and signaled David. David stood up, his voice as cold and precise as a legal statute. The beneficiary LLC was incorporated 2 weeks ago. The registered agent is a direct relative of Margaret Sterling. There are no deliverables, no contracts, and no services rendered. Just dummy invoices. The wires were authorized by Ian Sterling's digital signature. We have the complete access logs. David clicked to the next slide. IP addresses, timestamps, and the authorization chain of custody. It was irrefutable. The boardroom was dead quiet. Margaret stopped fake crying and stared at the screen, stunned to hear her own family implicated out loud. Oliver Barnes, the slick lawyer, scrambled to spin it. This requires an independent audit. You cannot hurl baseless accusations at my client. I tilted my head. Audit it all you want, but while the audit is pending, who carries the fiduciary liability for the shareholders? That sentence snapped the board back to reality. This wasn't a messy divorce. This was corporate theft. I looked straight at Ian, my voice level. You planned to drain the accounts and then force a divorce, so I'd be left holding the bag. Isn't that right? Ian gritted his teeth and hissed. Do you have actual proof of intent? He thought that as long as I only had the numbers, he could claim administrative error and wiggle out of it. I stared at him for a few seconds. Yes, I do, and I'll show it right now, I signaled Victor, who was standing quietly in the corner. His hand was already on his laptop, looking like a stage manager waiting to drop the curtain. The silence in the room was so absolute, you could hear the secretary's pen scratching the paper. Everyone knew that whatever came next wasn't up for debate. It was the kill shot. Victor plugged the HDMI cable into his laptop and opened a file. A video played on the screen. It was crystal clear, shot from a discreet angle in a private room at Gibson's Steakhouse the night before. No edits, no voiceovers. On screen, Pete Monroe sat across from me, twirling a flash drive on the table like a coin. He smirked and drawled, "You want this to go quiet? Wire 200 grand. If not, this is on the morning news. You know how it is. You choose silence or a circus." On the video, I didn't argue. I just asked calmly, "You're extorting me." He shrugged. "Call it what you want. I provide a service." The boardroom erupted. Several shareholders bolted upright, their faces tight with fury. I didn't let them spiral into arguments. I spoke over the noise, my words hitting like sledgehammers. This meeting was recorded in strict compliance with state law, with witnesses present and a sworn affidavit filed. Victor dropped a sealed manila envelope with red evidence tape onto the table. The extortionist's flash drive is secured. It will be surrendered to the state's attorney. I turned to Ian, making sure my voice carried to the back of the room. You didn't just embezzle. You hired a fixer to extort me and smear the reputation of Vance Holdings. Ian jumped to his feet, reacting like a man who had just been shot. I don't know who that is. You set this up. Oliver Barnes tried to intervene. This could be a third-party actor. You cannot definitively tie this to my client. I didn't argue with words. I just nodded at Victor again. This time, an audio file played. The voice was unmistakable. It was Ian. Sharp and authentic. Call Monroe. Tell him to pull the trigger on the smear campaign. Back her into a corner so she gets scared. Once she panics, she'll sign whatever we want. The room exploded. Someone swore loudly. One of the oldest, usually silent shareholders stood up, looked Ian dead in the eye, and spoke with absolute disgust. "Mr. Sterling, do you think this company is your personal mafia playground? You used the CEO's chair to finance a blackmail operation?" Ian's face went from beet red to ash gray. He shot a desperate look at his lawyer, but Barnes was speechless. Margaret shifted in her seat, wringing her tissue into knots. I looked at Ian. You can call me vindictive all you want, but you cannot say the evidence is fake. Backed into a corner, Ian played his final, desperate card, exactly as I knew he would. He spun toward the double doors and gestured wildly. Right on cue, Chloe was escorted into the room. She was clutching her stomach, her face chalk white, her eyes red from crying. She let out a weak whimper, playing the ultimate victim. Ian rushed to her side, grabbed her hand, and turned to the board with a trembling, theatrical voice. She is carrying my child. Because of Anna's relentless harassment, she was hospitalized last night. If something happens to my baby, who here is going to take responsibility? The room fell silent for a few seconds. That was exactly what Ian wanted to hijack the narrative with sympathy for a pregnant woman and distract from the felony fraud. Chloe sniffled, tears rolling down her cheeks. She whispered, I just wanted to be loved. Please forgive me. I don't want any money. It sounded pathetic, but I could see the cold calculation in her eyes. It was the same performance as her TikTok live, just on a much more expensive stage. I didn't interrupt her. I let her finish her little monologue. Then, dropping my words like heavy stones, I said, You can't build a family on a foundation of perjury. I looked Chloe dead in the eyes, then looked at Ian. You really think you can use a pregnancy as a human shield against federal charges? The air in the room grew suffocating. I gave Victor the final nod. Not a video this time, but the audio recording I had saved as the ultimate trump card. Ian's voice echoed off the acoustic panels, crystal clear. I don't care if the pregnancy is real or not. What matters is we use it to force her into a settlement. The recording clicked off. The silence was deafening. Some board members opened their mouths, then snapped them shut. Looks of sympathy toward Chloe instantly morphed into profound disgust. Chloe froze. She blinked rapidly, looking like she had just been slapped across the face. Ian looked like all the blood had been siphoned from his veins. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Margaret flinched violently, her hands shaking. I took one step forward. My voice wasn't loud, but it was so cold it gave people chills. Tell me the truth right now. Are you actually pregnant? Or are you just playing a role? Chloe panicked. She looked at Ian, desperate for a lifeline, and in her terror, she completely lost control and blurted it out. Ian! You told me to do exactly what you said. You said if I played the victim, she would get scared and pay us off. The second the words left her mouth, she went entirely pale. She had just confessed to a conspiracy in front of the entire board of directors. Margaret sprang up like a lunatic and screamed, drowning out the room. Shut up, you stupid bitch! You're ruining the whole family. Her shrill voice shattered her refined, country club facade, exposing the vulgar reality underneath. I didn't need to watch them tear each other apart. I turned to the acting chairman. My voice was crisp, cutting through the chaos. I motioned to immediately suspend all rights, privileges, and indemnification related to Ian Sterling. I motioned to turn all internal findings over to the FBI and the SEC for wire fraud, embezzlement, and extortion. I paused, delivering the final blow, and let the minutes reflect that they just admitted on the record to fabricating a medical crisis to commit financial extortion. I watched Ian collapse into his chair like his spine had been severed. I felt no joy. I just saw the absolute truth. When you choose the gutter to win a war, you suffer the most humiliating defeat on the exact stage you built for yourself. After I requested their confession be entered into the minutes, a dead, suffocating silence hung over the boardroom for a few seconds. Then, it shattered like glass. Some shareholders sat in stunned silence. Others muttered in fury, and the CFO was already calculating the potential hit to our stock price. Ian Sterling sat slumped in his chair, his knuckles white as bone. I thought he would just stay quiet, but no. When an animal is cornered, it lashes out blindly, hoping to drag anyone else down into the mud with it. Ian bolted upright, his voice ragged, screaming so the whole room could hear. You think you're so pure? You hid everything from the start. Who even are you? You played the poor, innocent girl to trap me into this marriage. He hurled the accusations like rocks, praying just one would hit and leave a stain. A few shareholders glanced at me, not with curiosity, but waiting to see how I would parry the attack. I didn't need to think. I answered cleanly and directly. I wasn't deceiving you. I was testing you. And you failed. One sentence. It instantly severed his attempt to pivot the conversation from corporate felonies back to marital grievances. Oliver Barnes, Ian's lawyer, scrambled to steer his client back to safer ground. Esteemed members of the board, personal matters have no bearing on these financial allegations. Regardless of Miss Vance's background, The transfer of funds and the PR dispute are separate legal issues. Ian, furious at being muzzled by his own lawyer, completely lost it. He snatched a folder from Barnes's briefcase and slammed it onto the mahogany table. Here is the lawsuit for wrongful termination. She is abusing her power as chairman to ruin me. He held the folder up like a shield, his eyes wild and bloodshot, talking fast before anyone could interrupt him. David, sitting to my right, stood up without an ounce of ceremony. His voice was cold, the tone of a litigator who has zero patience for grandstanding. The decision to terminate was executed by a quorum of the board of directors, strictly adhering to corporate bylaws. Mr. Sterling was terminated for cause specifically, breach of fiduciary duty and gross misconduct. Have you even read the corporate charter? David clicked his remote, and the specific bylaw flashed onto the screen. One line of text that rendered Ian's lawsuit utterly laughable. Ian froze like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water over his head. He looked over at his mother, desperately seeking backup. And Margaret, true to form, attacked with volume instead of logic. She pointed a shaking finger at one of the board members. You've all been bought off by this bitch! That's why you're protecting her. Hypocrites. Her screeching was an attempt to turn a Fortune 500 boardroom into a reality TV brawl, just to drown out the facts with noise. The silver-haired shareholder who had spoken earlier looked at her with glacial disdain and delivered one line that brought the room to a standstill. Say one more word, madam, and I will personally sue you for defamation. Just one sentence, but it slammed Margaret's mouth shut. She was used to ruling her living room, screaming at her daughter-in-law, bullying people she deemed weak. But faced with billionaires who had armies of lawyers on retainer, she shrank into nothing. I thought Ian would finally sit down, but he wound himself up even tighter. Because the harder he fought, the more he exposed himself. Right then, Meredith stood up. Her voice wasn't loud, but the weight of it hit like a sledgehammer. I have one final piece of documentation to enter into the record. Every head turned to the CFO. Meredith looked at the chairman and projected a new bank statement onto the screen. We have uncovered a line of credit opened under the holding company's name. The sole signatory is Ian Sterling. The stated purpose was project investment. However, immediately upon disbursement, the funds were wired to an offshore intermediary account belonging to Pete Monroe. The name Pete Monroe, echoing through the room for a second time, was like a knife twisting in an open wound. The atmosphere turned toxic. Ian might have been able to spin the first 3 wire transfers as vendor payments, but taking out a corporate loan and wiring it to a known extortionist and black PR operative? That wasn't just greed. That was corporate treason. Ian turned the color of chalk. He opened his mouth and stammered, "No, that wasn't me. I didn't." But the more he stammered, the more he sank. He looked at his lawyer with pure panic, as if begging, "What do we do now?" But Oliver Barnes was paralyzed. You can spin text messages and arguments, but you cannot spin federal bank fraud. I stood up, looked straight at Ian, and delivered a line that made the entire boardroom hold its breath. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed Vance Holdings. I paused, driving the final nail into the coffin. You took out a fraudulent corporate loan to finance a smear campaign against this very company. You expected thousands of employees to foot the bill for your dirty work? The acting chairman had heard enough. He slammed his gavel and ordered, "Mr. Sterling, you will cease speaking immediately. Security, escort him from the premises so we may conclude this meeting in an orderly fashion." Hearing the words "escort him," Ian snapped. He screamed, "Nobody touches me! I built this company!" He lunged toward the chairman's seat, wildly swinging his arms as if trying to rip the microphone away. Victor stepped forward instantly. He wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling. He just became an immovable wall. His voice was hardened steel. "You are trespassing. I am authorized to use physical force to remove you per building security protocols and the chairman's directive. You walk out on your own 2 feet, or I drag you out." 2 armed security guards flanked Victor. Ian struggled, but his spirit was entirely broken. The room was no longer looking at him as a CEO. They were looking at a fraud whose mask had been ripped off in public. Chloe stood in the corner, her face a sickly green. She whispered, her voice trembling, I don't want to go to jail." Her pathetic whisper reached Margaret's ears and became the final straw. Margaret whipped around and slapped Chloe across the face with everything she had. "Shut up, you stupid tramp! This is all because of you!" Chloe, clutching her cheek, broke down in genuine hysterical sobs. The entire pregnant victim charade was obliterated by a single slap. The boardroom felt like a battlefield. On one side, documents, data, ledgers, and procedure. On the other side, screaming, crying, slapping, and desperate finger-pointing. Amidst the absolute chaos, one thing was crystal clear. The villains had unmasked themselves. The man who was once greeted with respectful nods in the lobby was now being manhandled out the doors like a vagrant. I watched it happen without a shred of triumph. I just saw the cold reality. When the mask falls, nothing is left but sheer panic and audacity. The meeting adjourned under a heavy, oppressive cloud. Once Ian was hauled out, his screams faded down the hallway, leaving only the sound of the secretary typing up the minutes and the heavy sighs of the senior board members. I didn't stick around to take a victory lap. I silently signed the necessary authorization forms, knowing that if I gave them even an inch of breathing room, they would try to flip the narrative again. That afternoon, Ian's official termination was filed, alongside a criminal referral to the FBI and the state's attorney for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and extortion. David executed it flawlessly. Victor doubled the security detail around the building to prevent any repeat performances. Meredith notified the banks and corporate partners, putting a hard freeze on all compromised accounts. Every single door slammed shut. What I didn't expect was how fast public opinion would pivot. Within hours, the doctored video of my jealous rage was debunked. The raw CCTV footage was leaked to the press, complete with time codes showing Chloe framing the shot before Ian knocked over the water. The internet collectively asked, if she didn't do anything, who staged the video? I went from the billionaire villain to the victim of a psychotic extortion plot, while Ian's karma arrived with Amazon Prime speed. Banks called him relentlessly, not with offers, but with notices that his accounts were frozen pending fraud investigations. His black cards were dead. The 3 luxury company cars he was used to tossing the keys to valets for were repossessed. He went to the Gold Coast penthouse he still thought of as his, but the concierge stopped him in the lobby. "I'm sorry, sir. This is corporate property. Your access has been revoked." He screamed at the staff, but the concierge just repeated, "I'm following building protocol." The exact same scene played out at the other 2 condos. 3 locked doors, 3 brutal slaps to his delusions of grandeur. It turned out that everything he called his only existed because I allowed it. Late that evening, while I was reviewing the final civil filings with Charles, my cell phone rang. It was Ian. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. His voice was abrasive, but underneath the anger, I could hear the tremor of a broken man. "Are you happy now?" "No," I answered bluntly, "because you still owe the company money." Dead silence on the line. I could hear his ragged breathing. "Do you want me to die?" "Whether you live or die is your own business," I replied, entirely grounded. "I'm just no longer paying the tab for your choices." I hung up. I stayed late at the corporate office. Around 9 p.m., security called up. "Miss Vance, Ian Sterling and an older woman are at the desk requesting to see you." I knew immediately who it was. I didn't bring them up to the grand boardroom. I booked a small, sterile glass conference room with a security camera right outside the door. Not because I was afraid, but because I had zero tolerance for any more theatrics. Ian walked in first. The arrogance that usually radiated off him was completely gone. His custom suit was wrinkled, his face gaunt and exhausted. Margaret shuffled in behind him, her shoulders slumped, looking a decade older. The second she saw me, her tone underwent a miraculous transformation. Her voice was sickeningly sweet. "Anna, sweetie, please forgive me. I was wrong. I'm just an old fool. I didn't know what I was saying." She reached out to grab my hand. I pulled my hand back and looked her dead in the eye. "You weren't wrong because you're old. You were wrong because you're greedy." That shut her up instantly. Ian stood there for a few seconds, then took a step forward. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed caught in his throat. And then, right in front of me, he dropped to his knees. The man who had slammed his fist on the boardroom table, who had screamed to the entire lobby that I was just a spoiled brat, was kneeling on the cold commercial carpet. His voice shook. "Anna, I was wrong. Please forgive me. I didn't think it would end up like this. I wasn't surprised. I just felt a wave of profound sadness. Sadness because I knew his knees hitting the floor wasn't a sign of true remorse. It was a sign of absolute desperation. I looked down at him and spoke with cold, clinical honesty. You're on your knees because you're out of options, Ian. Not because you're sorry. Ian froze, his eyes welling with tears. But even while crying, he couldn't help but try one last manipulation. I still have my reputation. Please, don't press charges. I'll sign whatever you want. You shredded your own reputation the exact second you took your mistress to an ultrasound 15 minutes after our divorce. I cut in. Ian dropped his head. Margaret collapsed into a chair, wrapping her arms around herself. Right then, my phone buzzed. A text from Victor with an attached PDF. Hospital records acquired. I opened it. Chloe had been admitted complaining of abdominal pain and stress. But the ER notes confirmed there was zero threat of a miscarriage, and she had ultimately signed an AMA, against medical advice. Discharge, signing a waiver taking full responsibility for staging a conflict. Another cheap theatrical production. I put my phone face down on the table and looked at them. How much longer are you going to keep acting? Hearing this, Margaret gasped for air, and finally blurted out the truth. Oh my God. My son is ruined because of that. That tramp. She glared at Ian with a mix of fury and terror, as if realizing for the first time just how stupid he really was. I looked at Ian. My voice was steady. It was your choice. You chose her. You chose to build this trap. Kneeling on the floor, Ian whispered, "Give me 10 minutes. I'll sign everything. Just please, don't leave me on the street." I looked at him with zero malice. I was looking at a man begging for the exact life he used to spit on, and I knew the rest of this conversation wouldn't be about feelings. It would be about dotting the I's and crossing the T's so they could never pollute my life again. I watched Ian kneeling on the cold floor, listening to him beg for 10 minutes, and my soul was entirely at peace. There are moments when you think you will hate someone until the day you die. But when you finally see the man who degraded you trembling and begging, all that's left is exhaustion. The exhaustion of realizing that everything simply boils down to one rule: you reap what you sow. I nodded. Fine, 10 minutes. I immediately added a caveat to kill any lingering hope. These 10 minutes aren't for you to win anything back. They are to finalize the ledger. Ian looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Margaret sat curled in her chair, not daring to meet my gaze like she used to. I sat across from them and gestured to David, who had been waiting outside, to bring in the prepared binder. No threats, no yelling. Just white paper, black ink, and reality. I slid the settlement agreement in front of Ian. Read it. Assuming you actually want this to stop. Ian's shaking hand flipped to the first page. He didn't even finish reading it before he gasped. You're making me pay it all back? You are returning exactly what you stole, I nodded. You will cooperate fully with the federal investigation. You will turn over all documentation regarding the wire flows, the offshore intermediaries, and the shell contracts. You will drop your frivolous lawsuits with prejudice. I paused, locking eyes with him. And you will issue a sworn, public apology to the employees of Vance Holdings for orchestrating a smear campaign and dragging the corporation into the mud. Ian bit his lip. Apologize? To the staff? They'll laugh at me. You're terrified they'll laugh at you. But you didn't care that they could have lost their jobs because of your fraud, I said, devoid of sarcasm, just stating a fact. You don't save a reputation by screaming. You save it by acting with an ounce of dignity. Saying it, I felt like I had walked 1,000 miles. I wasn't lecturing him. I was reminding myself. Everything had to end in total clarity. Ian leaned over the documents again. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped the pen twice. He picked it up, then suddenly looked at me. His voice cracked. Do you really not love me anymore? The question pricked my heart for a fraction of a second, like brushing against an old scar. I stayed silent for a moment, then gave him the most honest, simple answer I could muster. I do. I love the woman I used to be. The one who believed in you, who endured everything, who blamed herself for your faults. But you? No, I don't love you anymore. Saying those words, I felt like I could finally breathe. There are some things that, if left unsaid, will sit like stones in your chest forever. Ian lowered his head. Tears dripped directly onto the legal paper. He signed his name. His signature today wasn't the arrogant, aggressive scrawl from the day of our divorce. It was the frantic scratching of a man with a gun to his head. I turned the folder toward Margaret, not for her to sign, but to say the thing I had held inside for years. I spoke slowly, not raising my voice, but ensuring she heard every syllable. You once told me that if I couldn't give birth, I was useless. You forgot that a woman's worth is not measured by her ability to act as an incubator. Margaret said nothing. She just hung her head. Her lips twitched as if muscle memory commanded her to argue, but she didn't. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she realized that her words could slowly kill a person without ever drawing blood. The second Ian put the pen down, my phone rang. It was Charles, I answered, keeping my eyes on Ian. Charles was brief, his words striking like a judge's gavel. Miss Vance, the clause in the will has been executed. The conditions are met. The designated representative committed acts, resulting in corporate damages. All of his vested stock options, severance packages, and executive bonuses are permanently voided and have been legally transferred to the scholarship fund named after your mother. He has zero grounds to claim a single cent. I hung up. The room was so quiet it felt like the oxygen had been vacuumed out. Ian snapped his head up, his eyes wide with horror. That's impossible. It's very possible, I replied calmly, without a trace of gloating. My father planned for everything. I didn't add you got what you deserved or serves you right. I just stated the fact, because sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't revenge, it's realizing the rules were written long ago, and you walked into the trap yourself. Ian slumped back into his chair, his face entirely drained of color. Margaret sat frozen like a statue. I stood up, took the signed confession and settlement, and nodded to David. Thank you. Proceed with the filings. I didn't want to watch a human being crumble any longer. I had seen enough. I walked out of the conference room and through the main lobby, the same lobby where he had knocked over the water pitcher to frame me. Today, the lobby looked exactly the same. The lights were just as bright, only the noise was gone. The employees who saw me gave respectful nods. I knew it wasn't fear, it was trust. As soon as I got into the back of my car, a text popped up from an unknown number. Miss Vance, this is Chloe. Please forgive me. Ian manipulated me into doing it. I stared at the words for a long time. I didn't know if she was actually sorry or just terrified of federal indictment. But it didn't matter anymore. I replied with one sentence. Devoid of anger or preaching. Choices have prices. Don't make a career out of making the wrong ones. Then I deleted the thread, like swiping away spam. That night, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my home office, looking out over the glittering Chicago skyline. Those thousands of tiny lights reminded me of who I used to be. I used to be that small. I used to think that if I just endured enough, I could save my marriage, my husband, my peace. But peace isn't something someone else gifts you. Peace is what you build yourself, by having the courage to stand up straight, say no, and take absolute ownership of your own life. I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt light. On the day of the divorce, they thought they had taken everything from me. But it turns out what I actually got back